guys? It's the Pound for Pound Boxing Show in association with Seconds Out Coffee. Today, a very special guest, head coach Tony Sims. How you doing, Tony?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much.
I say thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. It's always a pleasure to have you on. I want to go back to 10 days ago. Obviously, it's been 10 days since Conor beat Granados. He was a little bit frustrated after the fight, Conor. Obviously, it wasn't the tear-up that he was looking for. What's your analysis of the fight? Was you pleased with Conor's performance?
Yeah, I was pleased, obviously, with the result, and obviously the score cards was really wide. But with Conor, he always wants to fulfil his potential. He's still learning on the job, and where he had the quick win against Vargas the fight before. You can't just think you're going to knock everyone out. But I feel like Granados obviously changed his tactics early in the fight. I mean, he's never boxed like that in his whole career. If you watch I watched most of his fights, and I expected him to circle for the first round. He normally always does that, and then after like a couple of rounds, he just sits in tight in the pocket. And I don't know whether he felt Conor's power early doors and then just didn't fancy it, but it made for a bit of a negative fight, really. And it seemed like Conor was chasing the fight all night, really, and I think that was his frustration that just come out at the end, because he said to me afterwards, he said, I've trained for like 14 weeks for that fight, and I don't feel like I've really done much in there. It was just too easy a fight. And you can see how wide the scorecards was afterwards. And then when you look at the scorecards of, say, Broner, like one judge had it to Granados and the other two had it to Broner. And then even like the Sean Porter fight and the Robert Easter fight, the scorecards was closer. So, at the end of the day, I said you beat a good fighter, a world level fighter who's been in with everyone by, virtually every round on the scorecard. So aside from knocking him out, there really ain't much more you can do than that at the moment. But, as I say, we're still in a learning process, and, he's fight by fight, and he's learning bit by bit. And it's good when you see him go 10 rounds with a fighter like Granados, because when you go back to the gym, there's stuff that, we still need to work on. And that just highlights a little bit of what he needs to work on. And it's, he knows he's got to work on different things, and, each fight he goes into, he'll adapt to.
Brilliant. Do you think that it's sometimes these kind of fights is a blessing in disguise? Because obviously it's great, to knock your opponent out in the first 2 rounds like he did with Vargas, but to get the rounds in, especially at this stage of his career as he's pushing on to world honors, and he's gonna, the level of fighters is gonna go basically up after this now, whether it's a Broner or a Porter or an Amir Khan. Do you think it's vital for him to get those rounds in?
Oh, most definitely. It's vital to get the rounds in, and it's vital to get the right opponent at the right time, because if you look at his last 3 opponents, they're all like touching world level. So he's jumped from like, say, domestic level, sort of gone through a European level, and then onto the outskirts of world level, and everyone knows Granados and Vargas probably as gatekeepers of the world level fighters, but they always put a tough fight in both of them fighters, and that's why we chose them. And the funny thing was they both didn't present an hard fight for Conor Benn, and so it just goes to show that how much he's improved, because I'm certain that the way they both fight, them sort of fighters, I'm sure they would have posed problems to him if you'd have gone back 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. They'd caused massive problems, but both of them never caused any problems for him. It's just, he was more disappointing for the 20,000 Leeds fans, really, that was there and wanted to see a good scrap. And and I just feel like Granados didn't bring any of the heat that we thought he was going to bring, and he was quite disappointing, actually. But listen, as I said before, it's just a learning process, you know, and he'll go back to the drawing board, Conor, and just, you know, do the little bits and pieces that he needs to work on, and then, you know, go into the next fight with a little bit more improvement.
Was you shocked with the? I think you was in the same room because you came into the camera afterwards when IFL interviewed Granados and Conor afterwards. Granados was certain that he says that he won the fight. Was you shocked with those statements? And when Conor actually asked his coach on camera, the coach he didn't want to say no, but I think he had to for his fighter. But the coach wasn't sure about Granados winning it. Do you think it was a joke, or did you think he was being serious?
Don't know, because it was like plain to see he hardly won a round. You can't come over to here, flick out a few jabs, you know, and even the few punches he did throw, just Connor's, you know, slipped and rolled them, so he didn't connect with anything. And I think he connected one punch in the whole fight. And you can't come over to here, backpedal it, don't engage, and then think you've won the fight. But it was as I was saying before, some of these fighters, when they get into the veteran stage, they do, when you speak to some of them, they do get a little bit deluded. Do you know what I mean? They get deluded with how the fight's gone. And they get deluded in their career of not knowing when to stop fighting as well. You know, and over the years, like, obviously I've worked with fighters that, you know, I've worked with plenty of fighters that I've had to say to them, listen, it's time for you to turn it in. And they never want to accept that. And some of them go on still, you know, and it's just strange as a fighter gets, I feel like, as a fighter gets older, because I don't, you know, they just don't never seem to know when they've lost or when to give up boxing. And it's really weird, because you'd think of a man of his experience, he would know on the night that he'd got well beaten, you know. And it was funny. I was in Austria on last weekend with John Ryder, and one of the judges, funny enough, who was judging on the fight, the Conor Benn fight, I sat next to him. Funny, I didn't know it was him. Obviously, I didn't know he was the judge. And he said, "Oh, I was the judge on the Conor Benn's fight." It was like, he said, "I scored it 99-91. He was the Italian judge. I went, "Oh, wow." I said, "What round did you give Granados then?" And he just laughed, and he said, "To be truthful," he said, like, Conor Benn won the fight easily. He said Granados was never in the fight. So, you know, and everyone could see that. So I don't really know what Granados was thinking after the fight. He was a bit, if you watch the fight back, I think you'd be quite embarrassed to think what he said, you know.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if Connor's heard from him since, because Connor did say to him, "Go watch the fight back and come back to me." So I'm sure he hasn't come back to Connor since then.
No, well, Conor ain't said nothing, so I don't suppose he has. I think he would have been embarrassed watching the fight, really, to even think that he won any more than a round or two, really, let alone a fight, you know. But, you know, as I say, we just, you know, move on from that fight, make some more improvements, and then step up a little bit more again, and just keep stepping up until the times that I think's right to move him into that world title fight. But at the minute, we're still in a learning process. We're still picking the right opponents at the right time for him to gain experience. That's what he needs more than anything, to gain experience, and that way he'll develop. You know, he'll develop his ring smarts, and through getting experience and getting him with decent fighters. You know, because little things that they do. Funny enough, we were talking today. The little thing he was doing, turning with his head like that off the right hand, you know, that's the sort of move that you see Canelo do. The difference is Canelo rides it and then he comes back with something, but it's still a smart move, and you have to deal with them things, you know. And that's obviously the first time he's been in with anybody who could do that sort of move. So that's all learning experience, you know.
Brilliant. Obviously, the next step is another fight. Obviously, a bigger name, bigger level than obviously Granados. When I last spoke to Conor, I did mention the name. What I like about Conor is, at the time, it was before the Vargas fight. You mentioned a name to him, he would say, "Yeah, I will welcome that fight," but his focus is always on his opponent, which I like. He doesn't really drift off and say, "Okay, yeah, maybe after this fight, I'll fight this person." But a name that I've mentioned to him before, and I've done a few polls on our page as well, is him versus Adrian Broner. can you see this fight ever happening? And how big would this fight be, fighting a former world champion like Adrian Broner?
Well, I'd like to get Conor to fight a former world champion, you know, because it'd be a great experience. But I don't really know, because I know Eddie said to me he spoke to their camp, but you don't know with Broner. You know, he's like, you know, who knows what he's doing in his mind, you know what I mean? You know, you see clips of him on like Instagram and that, and you know, you don't know what he's doing, whether he's fighting or not. So you can't just you know, you just can't concentrate on what he's doing, really. I mean, we're going to look for an opponent that I think's right for Conor Benn, along with Eddie and Matchroom, and we'll look for the right opponent. And if it is Adrian Broner, it is, and if it is, you know, a different former world champion, then that'll be. But we'll just get the date in December, you know, get the opponent sorted, and then we'll, as I say, we'll go on to another learning fight. But you know, Broner would be a good opponent, and but as I say, you know, at the moment he's unreliable really to make a match with, because number one, if you did make a match, you don't know whether he's stable, and number two, you don't even know, you know, whether he'll turn up. So, you know, it's a bit of an hard one really, but the name would be a great name to fight.
Would you be open to travel with Conor to the States for that fight, or does he have to come to the UK?
I think we're going to stay like in the UK for a while he's doing these fights and they're learning fights. You know, he's boxed in America before, and it ain't as though he's not boxed there before. When the time's right and the fight's right, then we'll probably go over there. But at the minute, I think like so much of the UK public really want to watch him. It'll be a shame not to have his fights in England, you know what I mean, and around the country as well. I mean, the reception he got in Leeds was unbelievable, and I think we might be thinking about fighting in Manchester next, you know, and sort of, you know, doing the tour sort of in England, because you know the reception he gets from the public, they love him, do you know what I mean? And it'd be a shame to, like, you know, take a fight, i.e. like a Broner fight or a former world champion, to take it in America and like rob the fans over here of, you know, that sort of fight. So I think you know, we would like to stay here if possible and do these big fights.
Brilliant. Before I move on to your other fighters, I just want to bring up a tweet. I don't know if you saw it today. Conor tweeted, "What's next for me?" And the first person that answered him was Bradley Skeet. He said, "I've been out of the ring for 2 years. I've made a comeback, and I would love that fight." And he basically tagged Eddie Hearn, Dominic Inkle, and said, "Dominic made that call. I want that fight next." Obviously, I know it's not a fight that Conor will look at, because he's looking at people with higher rankings. But what's your thought of that tweet and maybe a potential future fight between these two?
Yeah, I don't think that's a fight that we'd probably be looking at now. As I said, we're trying to try and fight former world champions, but I like Bradley, and fair play to him to try and put himself forward. But he's probably about one of like about 100 fighters in this country that puts Conor's name in the hat every week, you know. So, you know, if you said yes to every fighter, British fighter that wants to fight Conor Benn, you'd be fighting every week for like the next 2 years, I think. So, you know, it's as I say, I like Bradley, but he's not in our plans whatsoever.
I want to move on to another fight of yours. October the 9th, the Big Cheese is back. He's going to defend his British title. A fight that I'm really looking forward to, against the undefeated Troy Williams. What's the mentality in the camp at the moment, and how much are you looking forward to this fight?
Yeah, it's a great fight, you know, and as you say, you know, I know Troy, and he's a good fighter. You know, he's unbeaten. He won his final eliminator to fight for the British title, so he deserves his shot. And you know, Ted's in great form at the moment, and he's still a young man who's developing and learning himself. So, you know, I think, you know, Ted's developing into a really good fighter. He's always had that rugged style, especially in the early days, of pushing forward and just standing toe to toe. And but I think over the last couple of years, he started to develop more into a box fighter where he can pick you apart from range, and then when he needs to sit in tight, obviously that's comfortable to him. So it's a bit hard to prepare for him now, because if you're his opponent, you don't really know whether he's going to box you on the back foot or whether he's going to sit in tight, you know, or whether he's going to do both. So it must be hard to prepare for him. And you know, he's in good shape all the time, because Ted's one of them fighters that actually enjoys training every day, and he loves to train, and he always keeps himself in good shape even when he ain't got a fight coming up. So, you know, he's had a good camp for this fight, and you know, as you say, there's only 3 weeks to go, and you know, the fight will be upon us. But you know, I'm looking for Ted to put a good performance in against a really decent fighter, and you know, after that, maybe leave the domestic scene and maybe look at the European title, because that was fought on the weekend in a really good fight over in Barcelona, and maybe we look at that after this fight. But as you were saying earlier about Conor, Ted's only got one name on his mind, and that's obviously Troy Williamson.
In your opinion, because obviously we know Troy can hit as well. He's got a good knockout percentage on his record. 17 fights, 12 knockouts. Can you see this fight going the distance?
It's hard to say that, really, because Troy's never boxed at any sort of level. That's the problem. If you look at his level opponents, you know, he had a draw with Jack Flatley, and you know, he had a tight fight with Harry Scarf, so he's not really been in any sort of level of opposition as Ted's been in. You know, and Ted's been in like quite high level opposition, one after the other. He's fought all the best fighters in his country, really, at his weight. So he's been in quite deep from an early days as well. So experience-wise, you know, I think Ted's been there and sort of done that sort of thing. And as I say, he's improving all the time. And each camp that we go through, he improves that bit more. So I'm looking forward to Ted fighting.
Brilliant. It could be the fight of the night. I can't wait for that fight. Another fight I want to bring up, someone that I'm a huge fan of, is Joe Cordina. Made a huge statement against Hernandez in the first round. I think tried to show up Conor that night with the first round knockout. How good was it to get him back into the ring and make a statement like that?
Yeah, it was good, because obviously he's had that bad hand injury where they basically had to take bone from his hip and basically weld it into his hand and into his metacarpal. So it's quite a long process, and he was out quite a long time. And then he had the comeback fight, and he was like, he'd tell you himself he was quite poor over the 10 rounds, but I think a lot to do with that was, number one, he'd been out for a long time, and number two, I think he was still wary of like even throwing the punch, you know, because you've gone from wearing big sparring gloves to like, you know, 8-ounce gloves, and then you're coming off a major hand operation, and then you got to like fully fledged, you know, let your hands go. And I think, you know, that was a lot to do with it in the back of his mind. And I think once he got that fight out of the way and knew that his hand held up, you know, he come back to the gym and, you know, differently, and put a lot of hard work in. And like the opponent, Hernandez, who he fought, we got offered a few fights and a few different opponents. But I looked at him, I see that he had a decision fight against Chris Colbert, who, as we know, is fighting for the WBA super featherweight title next fight. And he had a great fight with him. You know, he had a toe-to-toe fight with him, lost on points. And the only other loss he had was against a 17-0 guy. So coming into the fight, you know, he was a tough opponent. And I was saying to Joe, like, he's probably going to give you quite a few rounds this fighter, because he's a tough fighter. It's what you need, you know, a tough fight now. But, you know, like 53 seconds in and it was all over. So it just showed me the confidence and that Joe's got with both fans, and, you know, he's confident to let his right hand go.
after the fight, Eddie Hearn said that he wants to make a potential fight with Zelfa Barrett. Can you see that fight happening anytime soon?
Well, they're both very high up in the IBF, so there's a possibility that can happen. But Joe's in the WBA rankings as well, so you don't know whatever route Matchroom want to put him through, But they've just told me he's fighting in December, and that's all. So I'll leave it to them who they want him to fight. But Joe's one in fighters will just fight anyone, to be honest.
Brilliant. We can't wait to see him back in the ring. Huge fan of his. Another fight over the weekend made his return after 10 months. John Ryder made a huge statement with that 5th round stoppage. How frustrating has it been for John? Obviously, there have been talks about him getting this title shot. Didn't happen. And Saturday, he made a statement in the division as well. Give us your analysis of his performance.
Yeah, we sort of really only took that fight at 2 weeks' notice. And, I've been on to Eddie because they're talking about been talking about the big fights all year round. And his name was chucked into the hat a couple of times with Canelo, and then he was fighting David Morrell in June, and that never happened. And the year was escaping us. And he boxed last December, and that was his only fight a year before Callum Smith. And I said to Eddie like a couple of weeks back, I said, look, Eddie, he's going to need to get out. He's been ticking over. But you can't keep waiting for big fights. They fall through, because next thing you know, like another year's gone. John can't do that, especially at his stage of his career. He can't just sit another year out. And I mean, obviously the first year out he sat was because of COVID, and we couldn't help that. But anyway, Eddie said, bang, he's on in 2 weeks' time in Austria and an 8-rounder. And that's all I wanted to know, really. So it was basically just to get a few rounds under your belt, and get a bit of rust off him, and then you can start talking back again the big fights for John, and obviously I'll leave that up to Eddie and Matchroom to sort that out. But there's a few different fights that they're talking about, big fights. So we'll just see what happens there. But at least he's had a little outing, and whatever big fight comes up now, he'll be ready to go. That's the main thing.
Could we see him back in the ring before the end of the year?
I think you will, yeah. I think we will, and that was the whole reason why we sort of got him out now at this time of the year, and so we can get him a big fight by the end of the year. So I think a big fight, he'll be in a big fight before the end of the year's out. But who against, I don't know.
Brilliant. Another one of your fighters, another one that made a statement this year in April, capturing the British middleweight title, knocking out Denzel Bentley in 3 rounds. Felix Cash, the British Board of Control recently announced that Linus Adofia, former English champion, is in line to fight Cash for his British title. Has there been any talks regarding that? And when can we see Felix back out?
Yeah, well, Felix is already penciled in anyway for October the 30th on the O2 show. So he's already penciled in. He's already been training for that. I believe that's going to be a 10-rounder. And then, yeah, so I've seen that Linus been made mandatory, but I haven't heard any more than that. So I don't really know, but I think it goes to purse bids next month. So we'll just see what happens, because once he's got his 10-rounder in, we'll see where he is with the big fights, because he's his name's been chucked into the hat with Demetrius Andrade, and I think he was one of 2 opponents. So you don't know what's going to happen in there. That's for November. So just wait and see. But the main thing is for him just to get out again in October. Get a fight under his belt, and then we'll go from there, really.
Brilliant. Just another fighter. Obviously, it didn't go his way in Vegas. Is Martin J. Ward. Huge talent. Still 30 years old. He can still bounce back. Still get himself in the title contender. When can we see Martin back in the ring, do you think? Can we see him by the end of the year?
I don't know, really, because that knee injury, that he had in Vegas, he actually done that before he went to Vegas. I know it's been causing him problems again, and he thought he'd got better. He started to run again, and then he broke down again on it. So I think he's probably looking at, he's thinking that he needs to probably have an operation on that knee. So I don't really know how long he will be out for, and if he is out for a long time, I don't know whether, you know, he'll pursue his career again, because when you look at it, he's won the Lonsdale belt outright, so there's no point going back to there. He's won a Commonwealth belt and a European belt, so, you know, I don't really know what his thoughts are, what he's going to do, but I know that, you know, the knee's not right still, so, and I know that he might be having an operation on it, so I don't really know. I think it's probably worse than he thought it was going to be.
Hopefully, he'll have a speedy recovery, and hopefully we can see him back in the ring again. Like I said, huge talent, big fan of Martin J. Ward, and hopefully we can see him back in. Just as a boxing fan, just your analysis on, obviously next month we got the trilogy, Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury. Can you see this fight going the same way as the second fight, or can you see a different Deontay Wilder coming into this fight?
Yeah, I can just see the same outcome really with Fury and Wilder. I think Fury has mentally got his number, and he sort of knows how to beat him now, because the first fight he done it on the back foot. In the second fight, he obviously grasped at the way to beat him is to basically show his strength and size and bully him around the ring, and I just think he'll do the same thing again. I think Wilder, he might talk a good fight beforehand, but I think once he gets into the ring between the ropes, I think mentally Tyson Fury's got something over him, and I'll be surprised if Tyson gets beat by him. But who knows? There ain't been a lot said about the fight still, that much. It's like there was last time. So, you know, I don't know what's happening there really.
And obviously next weekend, not this weekend, next weekend, we got the return of AJ against Usyk. Are people underestimating Usyk, or can we see a typical dominating performance by Anthony Joshua?
Well, you can't underestimate Usyk because he's such a clever fighter, but I think we're probably all looking at the Chisora fight and what problems Chisora caused Usyk, and you've got to say at this stage of the careers that Joshua's a lot more accomplished fighter than Chisora, and he's actually a lot bigger than Chisora as well. So I don't really see number one Usyk beating Joshua, and I don't really see him, you know, lasting the distance either. I'll be surprised if he goes a distance. I just think Joshua would be too big for him, too strong, and I think the right hand that Joshua throws, you know, which is his honey punch, is that fast and accurate and, you know, so heavy, powerful that I just think, you know, he probably won't go past the halfway stage. I don't see it.
Brilliant. Tony, before I let you go, do you have a message for your fans, the ones that tune in and watch yourself and your fighters in action whenever they're out? And obviously the next one will be October the 9th with Ted Cheeseman against Troy Williams.
Yeah, you know, of course, like obviously I enjoy listening to what they've got to say on Instagram, and, you know, following my stable, and you know, may it continue, and appreciate everything, all the kind comments that they make, and you know, it's good that when a lot of fans follow your stable, and, you know, enjoy watching the work that you do with your fighters. So yeah, thank you for that.
Brilliant. Tony, I want to say thank you for taking your time to speak to us today. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Wish you the best of luck to you and your fighters for the rest of the year, starting with Ted Cheeseman on October the 9th.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
See you. Bye.